big head up on the screen. How's everyone doing this morning? Good? I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be at GitHub Satellite. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to one-up the keynote with Chris and Kyle, but I'll do my best. So today we're talking about integrating with GitHub. And so if you don't know me, if you've never seen me, I'm Mark Tareshawty. I'm Terabyte, anywhere and everywhere you can basically find on the internet, because I have this weird thing about just taking my handle. I'm a platform engineer at GitHub. So I'm a platform engineer in identity and access management. So anything that does with SAML, granular permissions, anything in that realm is sort of my wheelhouse. So Chris and Kyle today, they talked about the history of the GitHub API, some things that I didn't even know. They talked about like the first commits. They talked about how the REST API has grown, and they also covered this topic that we're going to get into a little bit today with OAuth applications. And if you're not entirely sure what an OAuth application is, that's completely okay. We're going to go through a quick tour of what OAuth looks like as it stands right now. So this is GitHub Classroom. If you've never seen it, if you're not in the education space, GitHub Classroom is a tool that we created to help teachers create assignments and teams for their students so they can set up permissions, so they can have cloning of assignments for grading and anything else like that. And you'll notice that you have this button here that is sign in with your GitHub account to get started. And if you've never clicked anything like this, you have to have a GitHub account, and when you click on it, it takes you to what we call the authorization page, and you'll notice that it says, authorizing GitHub Classroom. It has my name on there. It has a whole slew of permissions. It gives you some context and some information about what we're actually asking for. And then when you go ahead and click on authorize, what it will do is it will redirect back to the app, back to the original person who wanted to get your permissions, get your identity from GitHub. And we usually can denote that the transaction, the redirect, was successful because we have a login or a name or something to that effect that denotes that, yes, my GitHub user, Terabyte, is now a part of this OAuth app. And it's worked out really well for us. There are, like Chris is saying, it's 100% growth year after year after year of OAuth apps. But it hasn't always been without pain, without a little bit of confusion, without some problems. And so roughly 2 years ago, the GitHub platform team, we came together and we decided to take a really big look at what are we doing, do we still like it, how is it working for integrators, what do people talk about most. And we came up with some really big points that set up some things. So we have broad permissions. And so if you looked at that authorization screen that I had before, you'll notice that there's a lot of really kind of scary stuff on there. So you see we have like personal user data, admin access for your organization, public and private repositories. We have the ability to delete repositories. We need administrative access to organizations and teams. Now, this is an all-or-nothing deal, right? So we ask for public scope. It's called a scope. And then we ask for public, or we ask with public or private. Now, private gives me access to all of your private repositories. There's no way to opt out. So if you need to, maybe you just want it on one private project management repo or one repo just to keep everything in track, you can't really do that with OAuth as it stands right now. Another big problem that we have are tokens never expire. So when in that OAuth callback, when we clicked on that authorization page and we went back to Classroom, what actually happens underneath the hood is that we hand out what's called a token. It's just a string that has a set of permissions and it links to you. And the problem is that it never expires. So as long as the token is sitting in the database, unless you go ahead and revoke the authorization yourself, these tokens will be around forever, and they can act as you and have your credentials as long as it's sitting there. So then that goes on to the identity piece, right? So we've had this token, we hand it back to the app, and when the app uses your token, it acts like you. So there's no way to really get to understand, is the app performing an action for me? Or am I performing the action? We can't really tell that on the GitHub UI because it always shows up like you. And it also relies on the installer. So, for example, I work at GitHub. If I set up a new continuous integration service on GitHub, I set it up, it uses my credentials, it creates a token for me. If I were to ever lose access to the repository or to the organization for whatever reason, the entire application breaks because it relies on my token. So as soon as my token is no longer valid, the entire app breaks. And this happens a lot more than you think it would, it was really frustrating, both on our end and on the user's end, because we weren't able to automatically tell what had happened. And speaking of one single token, it has a static rate limit. If you're not familiar with what rate limits are or in the GitHub API, that's absolutely fine. Basically what it means is we give you a set number of HTTP requests that you can make to the GitHub API in an hour. Right now, that's 5,000 requests per hour. And so if it was just my token for the continuous integration service, that means the service can only make 5,000 requests. Well, for a small org or a personal account, you'll probably never hit that rate limit. But if you're large, if you're like GitHub or someone even bigger than us, you will eat through that rate limit really quickly. And so then you have all sorts of errors that we have to help you track down. It's not super clear what's going on. From the integrator side, you have to set up a webhook. Chris was talking about webhooks and how we send a JSON payload to your service with some information when an event happens. If you're an integrator, and you want to listen to those events, you have to create a webhook for each and every organization, or for a user account, you have to make one for each and every repository that you want to listen to or see the events of. And what's really frustrating is that if you have to remove that resource, you have to go and delete the webhook. If the user unauthorizes your application, you still have those events coming in, but you have no way of deleting it because you lost the authorization that you had to create the webhook in the first place. And so we got to thinking, and we put all these things together. And so at GitHub Universe, Kiwi, our fearless engineering lead, presented GitHub integrations. Except it's not GitHub integrations anymore. It's actually GitHub Apps, which is what Kyle was talking about earlier. So I'm going to give you a quick run-through of what GitHub Apps looks like from the integrator side and from the user perspective. So it's installable. So if you have an OAuth app, you automatically have to sign into the application in order to do that. That is no longer the case. You can actually set up the GitHub app by just going to a page and selecting some users or some organizations or a particular set. And we're going to look at what that actually looks like. And then you have granular permissions, what people were really excited about. You only ask for what you need. You no longer have to ask for everything because you only need some things. And you're like, Mark, how granular are we getting? Are we talking about like, certain private repos? I'm talking like issues read only. Like you can get down to the very fine grain. If you're an issues manager, you can't read the code. You don't need to see the code for a repository. All you care about are the issues and the pull requests. If you want to write a commit status, if you've ever used GitHub and you've seen the little green check mark next to the commit line or the red X, that is a commit status. If you ask for commit status as read and write, you probably don't need access to issues or pull requests, so we don't need to ask for that, right? We only ask for what we need, and this makes users a lot more comfortable in giving permissions because they don't have to give up all of their secrets or all of the treasure. And so you're like, Mark, you talked about webhooks, like what's going on with webhooks. And so now you have a singular webhook for your entire GitHub app. Pretend like those are all green. This is a test app that I had, and those are all failed webhooks, but you have a single place where you can see all of the GitHub events that are sending back to your app. And you're like, Mark, you talked about identity. What's going on with identity? Does it look different? And now we have bot actions. So a bot action All it is, it's actually a user under the hood, which is really cool. And you can see up from the issue comment that Probot stale, which we'll go over, has a little postfix, and it's a clear UI symbol that, yes, the application itself made an API request and changed something on our issues or our pull requests or changed something in our repo. It's really clear now the difference between when a user performs an action and the app performs an action. So then what does this look like from the user's perspective? All they have to do is go to the application page, the GitHub app page, and they can click on the install. It has a nice little description that you can add. It supports Markdown. And then it gets a list. And so you have all your organizations that you have admin access to or have other access to, and it also has your user accounts. So I'm going to go ahead and install Probot stale on my user account. So now we have a couple different things going on. I'm going to break them down for you. We have the permissions, so it's really nice. It's super clear what we're asking for and what we don't need access to. So in this case, we don't need access to code. We do have read access to metadata and single file permissions, so we can actually get down to the single file level. So if you need a configuration file, but you don't need access to the rest of the code, you can do that. And then we also have the ability to select a subset of repositories. So in this case, I'm only going to install Probot stale on my .files repo. And then after they click on install, it takes them to your installation page where you can see the information about the app. It can see what repositories you've installed, and you can add and remove repositories as you want. And people were really excited about this. We got so much really great feedback at GitHub Universe. And one of the other things I was really proud about launching was the GitHub platform community. This was a discourse page that we had set up to talk to integrators, to talk to GitHub app users, to talk to GitHub API users, to get feedback, to talk with them. They reported bugs, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It really made our jobs a lot easier being able to have that direct feedback, to have that direct communication. Sometimes you all caught bugs before we did, and it was really appreciated. So then we got to think some more. We had after Universe, and we knew we wanted to keep going. We wanted to create more and more things. And so we thought about what the future of what a GitHub app are. And so here are some of the things, like based on your feedback, based on the things that you gave us, some of the things we've created. So we have things like a one-time setup redirect. So all you have to do is add a setup URL to your GitHub app, like so. And then when a user goes to install your application, it actually has a small note that says, hey, we're going to take you from GitHub back to us, back to you. And so if you need to do any extra processing, if you need to do any extra setup after someone is installed, added an installation, you have the ability to do that now, and you don't need to set up anything extra. So I talked about installing a GitHub app. If you were part of the pre-release, if you were part of any of our journey together, you know that you either have to be the user that you're installing it on, or you have to be an organization administrator to install a GitHub app. That's no longer the case. You can now install a GitHub app as a repository administrator. So what this means is that maybe you don't own the org, but maybe the org owners gave you full, unlimited access to a set of repositories. Now you can install a GitHub app on that subset of repositories, so you can still have the installation. You don't have to wait for an org admin, or you only care about the small things that you work on. We talked about user identity, and if you were with us at GitHub Universe, you know that we had this old identity flow which had a single one-off token that we had to do, and we passed it back and forth, and it was clear, and then there was also some confusion behind it, because we weren't entirely sure why we had two forms of authorization. I know I keep talking about Universe. If you've seen the talk, or if you haven't, our fearless engineering lead, Kiwi, had, I've got 99 problems, and they're all OAuth. Well, signing into a GitHub app with the OAuth protocol. So we changed the way identity works, and now we actually use the same OAuth callback model for identity. However, we don't have to worry about the same kinds of permissions that we had with the old OAuth. So it's the same sign-in flow. It makes it really nice for GitHub app creators and integrators and users to have the same kind of experience regardless as if they're using an OAuth app or a GitHub app. But what's different is the authorization page. So we make it really clear, say, hey, this is a GitHub app, and we'd like to ask for your identity. We're asking for the permissions that you've granted us on the installation, all installations you have access to. We're going to hand back a token like we do, but it has the same granular permissions that you've given the installation. So it doesn't give it anything extra that you haven't asked or you haven't requested before. So it works the same way. You click on the authorization button, and it takes you back to the website. And then what the app can actually do with that token, we call it performed via under the hood. And what's really neat is that now we have parts of the UI that really signify, yes, as a user, I've performed this action through an application with my token. So my coworker David, he did something on Sentry, and you can see that it has the Sentry avatar as a smaller avatar to him. You can see David Saley's opened this issue 19 hours ago with Sentry. These really key UI points make it extremely clear how it happened, what happened, and how the process went. So I've talked about permissions, and I've talked about how every app has a set of permissions. The problem was you were stuck with them. If you joined us in the pre-release, you saw that every time you created a GitHub app, if you needed new permissions, you needed to delete the app, then recreate the app, until now. So we're introducing editable permissions as an integration owner. So what does this mean for you? So all you have to do is go to your permissions tab. You can go down to the permissions list. I've asked for issues read and write here, and I've also asked for pull requests read and write. Now, you can ask for read only if you want. It's just I need read and write for my particular case. And then we go down here, and we want to update the GitHub app permissions. Now, this doesn't come for free. You do need to ask for a user's permission to update their installation. Why? We don't want to give away permissions that somebody didn't explicitly say, yes, I agree to that. So what does this look like from a user's perspective? How do they see when you update your application? So it comes as like a notification. So it's kind of not clear there. It's highlighted yellow. And it says that my Probot deployer application has updated permissions that you need to take a look at. We also send an email to the organization administrators or the user who the installation belongs to. So we do like a double notification type thing. So going back to the GitHub page, I'm going to go ahead and click on Configure. And then I have my installation page with my permissions, and I'm going to go ahead and look at Details. And we have this really clear UI that now signifies, OK, Probot deployer is now asking for read and write to issues, read and write to pull requests. If you don't quite remember what permissions you've given, that's absolutely fine. So we can look at the unchanged permissions, and we can see, oh, the app already has access to read and write deployments, and it also has access to repository metadata. By metadata, we just mean the name, some information about the repository, really basic stuff that an app absolutely needs to have in order to function. This is a default permission that all installations get, regardless of how an integrator sets it up. And then once you've clicked on Accept, it has a flash message. You can see everything's updated. My next point was kind of given away a little bit. This is something I'm really proud of. We're introducing dynamic rate limiting for installations. It's a unique rate limit per installation. What do I mean by that? So everyone gets a base. Everyone starts off at that 5,000 requests per hour set, right? Just like you had for a personal token. But then, based on the number of repositories you have for a user or the organization, depending on where the installation was, and on the number of users. For an organization installation, we actually calculate a new limit each and every time your organization updates, you add a new repository, you add something to your installation, so that you have the rate limit that you need and that it's catered to you, right? We're hoping to expand on this. Right now, it just does counts of users and repos, but really what we wanted to do was to give you a way to be able to raise your rate limit to have access to GitHub more if you need it. If you're an organization with 1,000 users, with one installation, 5,000 requests is not really going to get you very far. So this is one of the things I was particularly proud of that we launched. I was really excited about this. A lot of people have been asking for this for a long time. Every time I talk to an integrator, it's, hey, can I have more rate limit? Can I have a higher rate limit? And so now we kind of give you, within reason, one that you can have. And so, we've had this big journey. We've had the platform community. We've gotten all this feedback. And so I wanted to showcase some of the apps that have actually gone above and beyond and now have GitHub apps in production ready to go. So our friends at CodeCov, what they do now is that they have their bot user, their CodeCov bot user, give you an output, a reading of your code, which they used to do, they still do, but the problem was that in the OAuth way, you had to create a bot user yourself and give them the credentials, a token, the username and password, something to that effect. You had to give them a user for them to perform actions as a bot. No longer do they need this. They don't need access to all the things they asked for before. And they have their own bot users, so that means you don't have to keep track of a bot account on your own, which is really quite complicated and has shared permissions, what have you. You can go ahead and take a look at that at the on their installation page. You can actually install it today and play around with it. They're really excited about it. I'm really excited about it, that people are jumping on the bandwagon and trying this out for us. And then we also have our friends who handed us delicious breakfast this morning, Waffle.io. And so they were one of our first partners to actually put GitHub apps into production, probably earlier than we wanted, but they're really good troopers, and it worked out really well for them. So they introduced WaffleBot. And so if you're not familiar with Waffle, it's a project management tool on top of GitHub, and they have their own project boards, they have cards, they have all these great things. And so when you perform an action on Waffle now, it actually changes on the GitHub side, and you can see that the WaffleBot the WaffleBot added the in-review label, WaffleBot assigned mal to the issue, so it's really clear, again, how that actually happened. And if you want to check it out, it's at bot.waffle.io. And the last thing I really wanted to talk about, I know you want to really sink your teeth into it, and you're like, I'm not entirely sure where to get started. Is there existing code? I always ask them, like, hey, is there existing code? Is there like a library that already does this for me? I'm a Ruby developer, so the term is there's a gem for that. So I want to talk about Probot. And so Probot is an open source library. It's a set of packages created by our own Brandon Keepers. It is a template and a plugin system for creating GitHub apps. It hurts a little bit. It's written all in JavaScript. It's a Node.js application. And it's really quite something. I've gotten to take a look at it. I really like it. It's really clean. The documentation is absolutely stellar. It walks you through setting it up, how to deploy it, what the permissions you need, how it looks from their side and your side. And you can actually check this out at github.com/probot. And so you're wondering, okay, so is it used in open source or is it just for private companies? Well, actually, our very own Atom uses Probot stale. We have a ton of issues in the Atom repo. And so Probot will actually now go through the Atom repository based on a set of rules that we give it. It's like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and close this out soon if there's no more activity. It helps to keep the repo clean, helps to make sure nothing really lingers. So it's been really nice to play with and experiment both from the open source side, where it's applicable in open source, and in the private business sector. If you want to check out GitHub Apps, you can look for developer.github.com/apps, which we just released. And it's like Chris and like Kyle said, it's ready for production use today. I'm very excited to share this with you. I'm very excited we got to launch this. I'm like, I'm trying to stay really calm, but in my mind, I'm just like, it's finally here. It's finally here. If you want to chat with me, come find me. I'm going to be at the open source table. I'm going to be walking around. I would love to get your feedback. I'd love to talk to you about your ideas and see if we can make that happen. I'm Terabyte, again, everywhere and anywhere on the internet, Twitter, GitHub, my email. So yeah, come talk to me. So I want to take a minute, and I want to thank all of the GitHubbers, all of the teams, all of the people that actually came together to build this. I tried to put every face on a slide, and it ended up being 3 slides of people. So this is just a big representation. I like to give them a round of applause. We really could not have done this without a cross-team effort. It's a really special thing when something comes together from all sides, and it makes it happen, and then we get to share it with you. Thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it. Come talk to me. I'd love to chat with you. Thank you.